Welcome, traveler. Please have a seat. Today's volume is The Dragonbone Chair by Tad Williams. After reading a bunch of modern fantasy, I started wondering whether the kind of stories that I want to read and wanted to write, more importantly, even existed anymore. And this changed finally when I found The Dragonbone Chair. Today we are opening one of the most influential fantasy novels ever written. It has influenced every major fantasy author you can think of, and it has trickled down to just about everybody who spends significant time in the realm of fantasy. It has influenced Brandon Sanderson, it has influenced George R. R. Martin, it has influenced every major author. When I sat down to write fantasy, because I spend a lot of my writing doing science fiction, but I also love fantasy, and I have fantasy story ideas, and when I sat down I wanted to write fantasy, I was struggling because I believe very firmly in reading the genre that you're going to write, even if you've read a bunch of it. And a lot of the fantasy stuff I was coming across was really dark, or it was very kind of knockoff Lord of the Rings in every bad way you can think of. I wanted a classic epic fantasy, and I was searching for stories that started slow, that kind of meandered a little bit, not in a bad way, but in a way that drew you more into the book. I was looking for deeper stories, and a lot of what I was seeing was much faster paced. It was much more, let's get right into the story, let's get right to the chosen one, let's get right to the dark prophecy and so on. And that's just not how fantasy novels that I've really come to love start. Even when you look at The Way of Kings, The Way of Kings takes a long time to get to the story. And The Lord of the Rings, yeah, it starts you off on the quest pretty quickly, but it takes some time to actually get to where it's going. And that's what I'm interested in, because when you get to spend time with the fantasy world, and that world is worth spending time in, it draws you in much deeper into the story, and it really becomes something that sticks with you. So I was looking for fantasy structured in the traditional way, and eventually I found the Dragonbone Chair. Dragonbone Chair takes place in the fantasy world of Osten Ard. Its primary character is Simon, and he is a kitchen boy. He literally, not unlike, in fact, Holt Cook from Ascendant. He is a kid, only Holt was more skilled. Simon is dreamy. When I was reading it, I was kind of like, this guy's got ADHD. He's dreamy. He kind of wanders around. He does anything other than what he's told and often forgets what he's been told to go do. And you spend a lot of time with that, with him living in the castle, with him doing castle life things, finding the nooks and crannies, exploring the castle in ways other people didn't, and wondering about the world and wondering, how long has this castle been here? Where before, he knew that the Hayholt, which is the name of the castle, he knew that Hayholt had been there a long time, but he also knew that it was built on top of something else, and wondered if the people before, a race known as the Scythi, did any of the things that he was doing when they were growing. And it lets you kind of just learn the world in a very natural way. And it also, you get very close to Simon because you spend a lot of time in his head, and he's not a chosen one per se. He's not quietly really good with a sword. He's not secretly magical. He's just a guy. He's just a kid, really. He's like 15 when the story starts. And you can kind of see some of that filter into books like Ascendant, right? That should sound familiar. And then it starts to introduce mysteries and introduce magic in extraordinarily natural ways, because it's doing it through the eyes of Simon, who's just full of wonder and full of curiosity and doesn't have any skills other than climbing things. And the person, Dr. Morganis, who introduces him to the concept of magic, his idea of magic is pretty much everybody's idea of magic. And Dr. Morganis is like, no, that's not how magic works. And for a large chunk of the book, you're not even really sure the magic that you're being told is magic, because you're told largely from Simon's perspective that it's magic, is actually magic at all. So the Dragonbone Chair is full of absolutely ancient world building. The world feels ancient and lived in. It has a living, breathing history that comes to you in the most natural ways possible. There's no lore dump. There's no prologue explaining how the kingdom came to be or any of that. It's very naturally introduced. There's ruins. There's lost civilization of the Scythi that you hear about from the beginning. There's legends of these powerful characters who did amazing things. The previous kings that ruled the Hayhold and the different civilizations of Osten Ard. And this is stuff that I always like fantasy book where I don't just want to see more of the character or more of the plot, but I want to know more about the world. I love that stuff in fantasy. The pacing is slow. And if you don't like slow pacing, this is not your book. But if you can appreciate slow pacing, and in fantasy, I think there's more readers who appreciate slow pacing, because that's still an element of fantasy storytelling for the most part. But I like it. I like slow pacing. I like fast pacing too. It just depends on the story I'm reading. But when it comes to fantasy, I want a slow pace. I want to be pulled into the world, pulled into the characters, discover things alongside the characters, and really know what's at stake when everything escalates and accelerates. Simon starts off, really, he has no skills. He's good at climbing, and he's good at not being seen, and he knows the ins and outs and secret workings of the Hayhold, or at least he thinks he does. You find out later on that he's barely scratched the surface. But his journey over the course of the book is from a guy who slacks off to someone who is deeply trying to do the right thing and is learning to use a sword and is learning to be a man alongside his friends and allies as they eventually go looking for one of the swords. And Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn is built around, the story is built around a prophecy of you have to bring these 3 magical swords to the Hayhold together, and only then will you be able to defeat the villain, essentially. Without going into it, I don't want to go into spoilers of the prophecy. The details of the prophecies are super important, so I'm not going to go into it much at all. But they go off looking for Thorn. Really, on the journey before that to the castle that he ends up at. I'm skipping a lot of detail here because I don't want to be spoilery, and there's just so much that becomes spoilery if I get into it. But he ends up having to flee from the Hayhold eventually, and then he sides with the brother of the king, and that's where he starts to learn to use the sword, and he starts to become more confident in himself and learn how to handle the world, and he starts to become increasingly focused and starts to shed that like daydreamy quality. But it doesn't all go away immediately, of course, and he goes through some seriously hard times in this book, and in doing so his character really grows into something where by the end of the book you're like, okay, he's gonna be a really good character, where he's becoming a man, he's becoming a warrior, and you start to think, is this gonna be like the Chosen One kind of guy? He ends up in a place where a lot of Chosen One characters start, and it takes him an entire book to get there, and that's what I would love about his character, because he does not start well. Secretly he was born, to a great warrior family and blah, 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 blah. No, he gets everything over time and doesn't have any natural skills other than climbing. And that's wonderful, because there's so many Chosen Ones type characters that already conveniently grew up in the exact kind of family that gives them the skills they need to do what they need to do when the story starts. And that's why his journey works. His journey works because it's all earned. It takes its time to give him those skills, and he's still journeying as the books go on. This is not a one book journey here. He's still learning this stuff, and he's still learning to become a man and to become a good man, and it's all just extremely natural. It is the development that needs to happen with more characters in fantasy and in fiction in general. Rather than start with all the skills, he needs to end up with all the skills. One of the biggest strengths of this book is the atmosphere, and the sense of wonder and exploration and discovery, because you're not lore dumped the Scythi. You're introduced to them in the exact same way that Simon is introduced to them, as this, almost mythological species that you don't really know anything about, but they're probably not good guys. They're probably evil, and they're probably sinister, and all this other stuff. And then he's introduced to them gradually in the course of the first book, and all of that mythology starts to fall away, and you start to see the actual thing, but the actual thing is still wonder and curious, and there's still some but also, like, as you learn the truth, it just gives you more questions. And it gives Simons more question. And that's how everything in this book is explored. That's how the trolls are explored. That's how, the various ruined cities are explored. That's how the true history of Osten Ard is explored, is gradually, over time, with one answer opening 10 more questions. And it's really just so important that authors do that, and they don't just lore dump. And there's so much lore dumping now, even in good fantasy. So one of the things I think that's really missing in a lot of fantasy right now, and this is why the Dragonbone Chair really pulled me in, is there's hope. There's mystery, there's hope, there's ancient lived in quality to the world that just in a lot of fantasy doesn't exist at all. And I can use a lot of examples. Shadow of the Conqueror comes to mind. It was a really good example of a world that's not lived in. But this takes its time a lot like Tolkien, but in different ways. And it's all about slow discovery, the slow development of character, and then the gradual acceleration of the plot and what's going on. And every step of the way, you're brought into this world that feels extremely lived in. You get one mystery after another where nothing is fully resolved until the end of the last book, and even then there's some stuff you're not sure about. There's a lot of good fantasy now that doesn't follow this, and that's fine. There's nothing inherently wrong with it. But I deeply prefer stories that do this, and I think a lot because when everything is just dumped on you, it feels like a different genre almost, where it shifts almost into like a sci-fi or a different type of genre that moves faster traditionally. Anybody who loves epic fantasy, Tolkien, immersive worlds, character growth will love this book. If you're looking for the fast-paced stuff, you're not gonna want to read it because you're gonna spend too much time following around this bumbling, goofy kid before getting to what you're actually looking for. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just that's what this book is. It's slow-paced. It's immersive. It has deep character growth, deep history to it, and it builds slowly. It has a lot of Tolkien-esque stuff where you have gradual journeys from one place to another, and you have magic that's not quite explained. It's never quite explained. It's more of a soft magic than a hard magic, and I appreciate hard magic, but sometimes soft magic is really nice because you don't know, and it fits really well with this kind of story especially because you're never following the perspective of somebody who uses magic for terribly long. You're mostly following Simon or characters similar to Simon. And so magic is kind of held at arm's length in a way, and its rules are never fully explained, and it leaves you really wondering about it and wondering how it works without ever answering the question. In a lot of ways, hard magic can start to feel like a math quiz, and this leaves you that wonder, that curiosity, that perspective from the non-magical using characters of like, how does this work? What can it do? Is it reliable? And it also leaves you in awe of the magic when it happens. And I haven't even touched on the plot, and I'm not really going to because the plot of the first book matters, but the plot really becomes more intense and something that has to be discussed a lot more in the later books. In this book, this is all about character building. This is all about gradual world building. It's immersion. It's slow storytelling. It's politics that seem just like they're just politics on the surface, and then becomes part of something else that's going on. And it's seeing these characters develop, mostly Simon in the first book, but other characters as well. And the world is never fully answered. It always leaves you in wonder. It always leaves you in mystery, and it answers the questions you need answered for the plot, but it leaves more. And it leaves you at the end of the series going, I want another book. And this is why it has endured. Because for every fantasy author, there is something to take away. And for every fantasy reader, there is something to remember about it. It's not another book you close and then don't think about 10 minutes later. It's a book you come back to. It's a book you think about. It's a book that you, on your second reading, see things you didn't see on your first reading. So it very much can pull you back into that world. And a very select few remind us of why we fell in love with a genre in the first place. And for me, the Dragonbone Chair is that book. The Way of Kings brought me back into fantasy after years of being away from it. The Dragonbone Chair reminded me of why I fell in love with it in the first place. And it reminded me of things I need to do as an author for myself. And it absolutely deserves a place in the collection. so many takeaways that it's a reminder to authors, take your time, let stuff happen naturally, don't force it to make locations feel like they're inhabited. Give the world a history beyond just this is what I want to lord them. Give them hints and little mysteries. Don't explain everything. Don't have the main character know all the things, even at the end. And it's a hard thing to do, to balance mystery and with explanation. But doing that and making locations feel inhabited and doing gradual character growth and establishing ancient history in a natural way gives you a book that people will come back to. Every author of fantasy needs to read this book. It has been good seeing you again, Traveler, and I will see you next time you stop by, and there will be one more book in the collection.